Welcome to the Hidden Potential Podcast. I'm your host, Homer Hargrove. In today's episode, I'm going to share an audio clip from a recent speaking engagement I had at a recovery event. Every time that we do ministry, most times we think that we can clearly, quote unquote, preach the gospel. But what happens when you go to an event where you're not necessarily allowed to preach the gospel? Well, this is one of those events. I was not allowed to preach the gospel, but I want you to look at this clip and see how I presented the gospel through my story. At the end, I'm going to share some specific items I think you should take away as we discuss. But before this clip plays, I want you to know that the audio quality might not be the best. Bear with me. I think that it will still be valuable to you.
Hello, my name's Homer, just like The Simpsons. I just get that out of the way. And I always love it when people say, oh, we're like the Iliad. It's like, thank you, but I try to start from the bottom, so I can only go up from there. When Roy asked me if I could share today, he specifically told me, do not preach. And I was like, okay, got it. And then a couple of weeks went by, he's like, yeah. And so like, you're gonna just share your story, right? I was like, yeah. And then like a couple of days ago, he texted me saying, and you're just gonna share your story, right? And I was like, bro, I get it. And see, that's all I want to do today is really share my story. And I feel like our stories are a lot like fingerprints. If you could just do me a favor, lift up your hand, look at your hand real quick. And see, all of us, we have these fingerprints on our hands. From far away, they all look the same, but when you get up close, there's not one that's like the other. See, our stories are so unique, but see, we all have stories. And in my story today, when I was thinking about kind of where I was, I thought about these 5 moments in my life that were almost like unexpected, pivotal moments. You know, you have these things that happen in your life that kind of change the course and the direction of where you're going. And that's what it was for me. And the very first time was when I was just this little kid. I think I was like 5th or 6th grade. And at the time, it seemed like family life was somewhat normal. At least it was to me. And you know, when you're a kid, you don't really recognize certain things. It's just normal to you. And I remember I was throwing this big fit because we didn't have groceries. And I was throwing this big fit, and I was mad and I was upset, and I was telling my dad, you promised you were going to go to the grocery store. And I remember my brother, he saw me throwing this fit, and he's my older brother. I looked up to him, and he came over to me, and he said, a lot of people have it worse. A lot more people have it worse than you. And it was true, right? It was true. Everyone there's always a harder story out there. But for me, unexpectedly, it kind of produced this core memory in me that carried all the way into adulthood that I don't deserve. Y'all know what I'm saying? And I felt like I'm not allowed to deserve things. Even when it comes to like basic care, I felt like I don't deserve that. And I carried that through, and it started affecting the way that I made certain decisions. And as time went on, you know, my parents ended up getting divorced, and for me, it seemed like all of my brothers and sisters saw it coming, but for me, I was so young to where I was totally surprised. And it was like one of those nasty divorces to where I was in middle school at the time, and my dad picked me up from school, and I go outside, and there's a U-Haul. And I'm from Texas, but at the time, we lived in Florida, and he picked me up in the U-Haul and drove me all the way back to Texas, and I never said bye to my mom or anything like that. And it was kind of like one of those unexpected moments in life to where by that time I'd already gone to 4 different elementary schools, 2 different middle schools, and soon I'd be going to 3 different high schools. And I felt like every time I was trying to make friends, it was just kind of like ripped away. And now, not only am I being ripped away from friends, but I'm being ripped away from my mom. And it started to produce these confusing thoughts, these confusing feelings. And again, I was still really young. And what happened during that nasty divorce is, sometimes divorces can be ugly. And with this one, there's a specific day where my dad called me into his room, and he showed me his computer, and he said, look at this email. And I didn't really understand what I was reading, but it was an email from my mom saying that he could have custody of me, that she would give up custody rights if he would give her a certain amount of money. And for her, I'm sure it was just like, somewhat logical reasoning. But for me, it felt like I was no longer wanted. I felt from that moment forward, I felt unwanted. Again, I'm still in middle school at this point, and it started to really affect me. Those are some like pivotal years, and I started going through what I thought was seemingly normal life, and I started looking around at the other kids at school, this brand new school, and seeing this somewhat more normal life, and I started to get kind of envious and jealous, and I started feeling more of that unwantedness, more of that confusion, and it just turned into this rage. It turned into this rage that kept building up and building up and building up. And what I did to fill that rage and to try to fill that void of feeling unwanted by my own mother was gangs, violence, and eventually drugs and alcohol. And see, for me, I went through a long time. I'm like, DARE, y'all remember the DARE programs? That really, they really did a number on me. I was like really trying. I was like, I gotta make this lion proud. And I was really going at it, and I was resisting. I was saying no to alcohol. I would literally be committing acts of crime and violence, like, no, dog. I'm saying no to Jack Daniels today. No, I don't need that. But here I was committing crimes and violence. But eventually, I remember one night, and out of all the things that could go wrong in life, I remember I got really upset because of a breakup. And I was really bummed out, sad, and it was kind of a messed up breakup. And by this time, I had not had a relationship last more than 30 days. And so I was like, at this point, I was starting to develop this idea of going back to feeling unwanted. I was like, I'm cursed. I'm not just unwanted by my family, by my mom, but I'm unwanted. And so that's why a gang really was like appealing to me. It's like I could belong here. And this one, I remember it was this one night where this leader of a certain gang, it was just me and him, we're hanging out. And I don't even know how we have alcohol all the time, but here, I'm a kid in high school, and he hands me a beer and says, this will make all your problems go away. And out of all the times I had been offered alcohol, this felt like an exceptionally vulnerable time. And so I shotgunned the beer. And from that point forward, I learned that I'm somewhat of an extremist. And I started drinking every single day. And soon after that, I started smoking weed every single day. Then, you kind of want to start exploring. And I start going into pills and shrooms and Triple C, what is that? And it just kept escalating and escalating, and I had this viewpoint of no limits. There was nothing that I wasn't necessarily hesitant to try, and it eventually, while I was still committing crimes, still committing acts of violence, I still was holding on to this idea of like, what gang am I going to join? And all the other classmates I had, they were like talking about what college they were going to go to. And, there's like, oh, my mom really wants me to go to Baylor. And I was like, what's a Baylor? And I was seriously considering, man, maybe just one day if I try really hard and put my whole heart into it, one day I can join the Italian mob. Just if I could become a professional criminal. And I was like, if not that, at least I could join the cartel. I'll settle for that. And I was so adamant that this was the life that I was going to have. Well, eventually I got into some trouble with the law. And it's funny because when you commit a lot of crimes, I feel like we always get caught for the things you least expect. It's kind of like out of everything, I got caught for this? And then I ended up getting on probation. It was originally assault and robbery, got dropped down to criminal mischief, and I was like, woo! And then I did good for a little bit as far as like not being caught, and then I got caught for attempted theft. And, and again, it was one of those things where I was like, man, this is what I got caught for? And I ended up, at the time, I was already, by all this train of events, I had been positioning myself to be independent as a 14-year-old, 15-year-old, 16-year-old, and I was never at home, and I proved that I could be homeless. I could sleep outside, I could steal for food, and I could, I could find my own way. I didn't need any family because I'm unwanted anyway. Why do I want them? And eventually I would stay at my half-sister's house. My dad had moved away, and I was making it work, but once I was getting in trouble with the law so much, she got tired of it, and she kicked me out. And I went to visit my mom that summer, and my mom, I felt like she was in this place where I could, as a teenager, visibly see how lonely she was. And even though all these years I felt like I was unwanted, at that point I thought, well, maybe me being here will help her. And let me tell you what hanging out with my mom looked like. After not seeing her for a year, 2 years, I go to visit her. And I'm talking about with all of my parents, the most I would conversate with them is like every 3 months we have a 3-minute phone call. And I go to visit, I go to live with her, go to visit with her. And our time of hanging out was her taking me to the bar with her while I sat next to her and her drink. And that was our hanging out. That was our bonding. And I ended up moving to Florida out of somewhat unwanted circumstances and also out of an inclination, well, maybe I'll be able to help my mom. And it didn't help at all. It ended up just me being home alone while she went out, and then I would just drink by myself. I really don't know how as a teenager I got, it's like I always had alcohol, I always had drugs. I just don't even know how I got it sometimes. But I remember there'd be moments where, especially early on, I would just be drinking by myself, and I would try to call an old friend. I'd try to reach out, because I hadn't even started like a school year yet. I was still so alone at this house that no one was at. And as I try to reach out to all my old people, the people that said that they would get jumped for me, the people that would fight for me, the people that we were so close to where when I was with them, I even have a brand on my chest because they're like, all right, this is going to be serious now. This is our clique. And I got branded on my chest as an insignia of our group together. And now they don't even pick up the phone. Now I'm the only one trying to call them. No one ever calls me. And that's where I developed the idea that I have nobody. I have nobody. And see, that's where I started to really turn away from the gangs and the violence and the crimes, because it wasn't as much as that I didn't want to do that stuff anymore, but I felt like in that point it's like not even wanted by the gangs. I'm not wanted by my family, by my mom, by anyone, not even by these gang members. I have nobody. And that's where I started to really get into the drugs and alcohol. And 90% of the times when I would do drugs, when I would drink, it was always by myself. And even when there was people there, it almost felt like socially awkward for me because I usually just do this by myself. And I think it's funny how people, now that I've been sober for so long and I'm in like the Christian world, and I'll see random people like post like, you really should stop drinking coffee because it's technically a drug. I'm like, dog, look. I don't think you really know what you're talking about. and I drink my coffee black, and my wife is like, how can you drink your coffee black? It's so bitter. I was like, well, when you drink Everclear without a chaser, this is nothing. And the more that I would try to fill that void, that feeling of having nobody, that feeling of being unwanted, the more insatiable it would get. It's like it was just no longer enough, and I always needed more. I always needed more. I always needed more. And for me, it got to this point where eventually I couldn't live at my mom's anymore, and through a train of events, I somehow ended up in Del Rio, Texas. And it's like I'm just like being ping-pong back and forth. And it got to a point where I was in Del Rio, Texas, and now I was in this troubled spot because I no longer have as many plugs as I did. And I only have limited kind of drugs that I could do and limited kind of supply of alcohol that I can get because I have to build up my supply again. I have to build up my connections. And while I was there, by this time, I feel like I had done so many dark things, because it wasn't just that I would have self-harm. It wasn't just self-sabotage, but there's moments where I was truly violent against other people who didn't deserve it. And in all of that mess, I remember there was these moments where it's like even just like the moments where I couldn't do cocaine, so I would cut myself. And it's like I would get like some type of release, and I had these razor blade marks on my chest, on my arm, because I was just trying to feel something. That's really what I wanted, is I wanted to feel something other than that numbness. Y'all dig what I'm saying? And it started getting really dark, right? It was really dark, because that's what happens. You just go deeper and deeper in that pit. And there's this point where I started having what I feel like were these like ooga booga experiences. You know what I'm talking about? To where they were happening when I was not tripping. And all of a sudden I felt like I was seeing these like demonic looking faces. I was hearing these voices, and it got to a point where I would be laying in bed at night, and I'd wake up at that crazy time, that 3 a.m., and I'd wake up to this audible screaming in my ear, to where I would feel like just genuinely deep down to my soul terrified. I was terrified. And there's so many nights where I was just afraid to open my eyes. I was becoming more and more afraid of the dark. Here I was, so I thought of this young thug, and I was terrified of the dark. And I would be at school, and in the middle of the day, I would just be anxious and wondering, how am I going to make it another night? How am I going to make it another night? And I began just getting more and more anxious and disturbed at what was happening to me. And at the end of the day, the drugs I was getting, it wasn't fixing anything. And there's these moments where I was just feeling like, I need more. I need more. I need more. Well, luckily, I had this superstitious sister, and she told me if I let the Bible open to Psalm 23, it would keep demons away. And I was like, well, shoot, I'll try anything. And keep in mind, I was never raised in church, never read a Bible. In fact, I never read a book before. And so I somehow found this old King James Bible, and it was just this pivotal part of my story, because when I opened it, the bookmark happened to be on Psalm 23. Right? I didn't know that there was a separate books in the Bible. I wouldn't have known how to get there. The bookmark was on Psalm 23 as like goosebumps, right? And I was like, oh man. And I read it, and it's the verse that says, though I walk through the valley of shadow and death, I will fear no evil. And man, for me, that was just like exactly what I needed to hear. And I just felt so good in that moment. I felt this peace. And I started reading like more and more Psalms, and I let the Bible open that page, and it was the first night that I actually slept good. And from there, it sparked my curiosity, and I started trying to find out who this God is, who this higher power is for me. And I started this rhythm to where I was like, I'd never raised in church, but I knew that people go to church on Sunday. And so I would get up early in the morning Sunday, I would load a bowl, smoke some weed, and then I would read the Bible. And as I would read, I felt something different than all the highs I ever felt before. And it was this connection to my Creator. And I started becoming more and more curious about who God was. And for me, I saw my higher power through Jesus. There's one day as I was reading through these scriptures, I was reading about Leviticus, and in that book, it talked about all the sacrifices that they would make for people's sins and the Jewish culture, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. How am I going to catch a bird and kill it to get my sins forgiven like this? I was like kind of grossed out. I was like, man, I got to wring its neck like this and sprinkle its blood here and there. I was genuinely disturbed. And then it clicked for the first time that, oh, that must be why Jesus died on the cross. And for me, in that single moment where I had this realization to where this connection was made, I was then overcome with this emotion that God loved me. God loved me regardless of the things I had done. And see, it wasn't any time, like I didn't I didn't have like this idea of hell insurance. Like, I just really don't want to go to hell. It was just this genuine thought that this higher power, seen in Jesus, loves me. And man, that really changed me. And in that moment, I felt like my heart changed forever. And as much as I chased after God in that moment, it took me a while to really give up smoking weed. I was like, I little by little, I was like, okay, maybe I can stop doing a little coke here and there. Maybe I'll stop popping pills. And then I was drinking it. I was like really holding on to weed. I was making like the best excuse, like God made it. Like, I was doing all that. I'm not banning oregano. Why should I ban this? And I was making all these reasons why it would be good. And I just felt like there's something in my heart that felt like there's something more to find. And I told God, okay, fine. Look, I read about like fasting, where like people in the Bible wouldn't eat for a duration of time. I said, okay, God, look, I'm going to go on a fast where I don't smoke weed for 7 days. And to me, that was a big deal. That was like a big, big deal. And I said, I'm going to do this for 7 days, and by the 7th day, I need you to just show me. I need you to show me something, speak to me something. And by the 3rd day, I felt overwhelmingly that God had showed me that what I was really trusting in weed for was not necessarily bad. That what I was really wanting was peace. And by that 3rd day, I felt like God, my higher power, showed me that I could trust him for that peace. Like without a doubt. And that ended up becoming the day that I got water baptized. I don't think water baptism is like an official thing that marks like someone's birthday or something. But it was significant because it was also the day that I decided to be sober. And it was January 27th, 2010. And I've been sober for that long. That's what, like 13 years now? 13 years. And I went from drinking and doing drugs every single day to where there's this moment of change to choose sobriety. And I wish that would be the end of my story. But what happened is I ended up, I was like real into it, you know, like I really, when I gave my life to Christ, I really gave my life to Christ. I was still, rough around the edges. When I first volunteered at like a car wash event where they were raising money, this guy was like trying to like be aggressive towards me. One of the other leaders was like, come on, just do it. And like talked in a belittling way. You know how church people can be. And so I just got started. I just got to the show. And so I got up and I got in his face and I said some words that maybe old Homer would have said, but not as bad. But I got in his face and I was like, you ain't gonna talk to me like that. And when I was done sharing my piece, I realized that everyone had stopped and was looking at me. And they told me later that they all had their own conversations about me that I would never last more than 2 weeks at church. They're really Christian. And see, right after I ended up giving my life to Christ, I started going to this church, and I soon went into this like youth ministry internship. It was a year-long internship. Again, I'd never been raised in church before, so I just thought like this is just how it is. It ended up being a cult-like, legalistic, crazy church place to where at the time I was like, well, I guess just how y'all roll. This is it now. And that whole school, that internship, they're literally defending class action lawsuits for trauma, psychological trauma, emotional trauma, even physical abuse. And just to give you an example, there's one night where in the guys' dorm there's a night where some of the house dads, they want to have a power trip, and so they got all of the guys from the dorm to sleep in these bathrooms on the floor. They made us all stack into the bathroom to where we were literally like sardines, shoulder to shoulder. And we didn't even fit thin, so we had to bend our legs and knees so everyone could fit on the floor. And they wanted to dehumanize us and belittle us, so they did that. And then they put a big speaker right in front of the bathroom door and blared music all night. One single song that's like, I don't even know what song it is. It's just like really obnoxious, loud song, and they just put it on repeat all night till 4 o'clock in the morning. And I'm sharing this part of my story because I wish that after my sobriety date, that was just like rainbows and butterflies afterwards. Like, and hell yeah, guys, we did it. All right, drop the mic and we just go on. But see, in my pursuit of sobriety, in my pursuit of my higher power, I was experiencing all this like additional trauma in life. I thought it was just going to all be in the past. And here, now I'm having the new reasons of why I shouldn't be doing drugs rather than just the old ones. And I told y'all before how I had self-harm. I would cut myself. I'd never, even though I would do that, I never had a genuine thought of suicide. I just wanted to feel. But after going to that internship, I had in my mind that I was broken. Because after choosing sobriety, after choosing this Christian faith, I would still struggle. I still struggled. Sometimes it wasn't always drugs or alcohol. It was something else I would struggle with. It was something else I would have a hard time with. And I felt like I was this broken person because I thought I was the only person that was still struggling. That I was the only person that was really still trying this hard. You know, maybe at the beginning you try hard, but then eventually, like, you just get used to it. It's easy, right? It becomes easier. And here I was 5 years sober, and I was like, man, I suck. And I was convinced that I was broken to the point where, for the first time, I started having these thoughts of suicide. Not because anything the Bible said or anything that I felt like God told me, but because of what this church had told me. And the very thing that I had these deep thoughts of suicide about was I felt like I wasn't good enough. I felt like I was broken and that I would never be able to be fixed because I'm still thinking this way or that way. And it's funny how the very thing that brought me to my higher power is now somehow convincing me that my higher power doesn't want me. See, I started off with that God loves me regardless of what I have done. And now I'm thinking, well, there's nothing I could do for God to love me. And I remember these moments where I was literally fantasizing about suicide. I was imagining what it would be like to drown, and practicing holding my breath in the shower to see, how close I could get. And I remember finally I was like, I need to tell somebody. And I went to the associate pastor of the church, and I was a youth pastor at the time. And I was like, look, I got to be honest, I'm struggling with this. And I feel so depressed. I feel so anxious. I feel so isolated. And I'm having these real thoughts of suicide to where it's making my wife scared. He just kind of sat back and said, look, don't tell anybody else what you told me. And I'm going to have to stop meeting with you too. So just continue what you're doing. And he never talked to me about it again. See, it was no help at all. And I struggled so much with trying to figure this part of my faith out, of my sobriety out. And it got to a point where I decided to press it down and keep going. And it was back in 2019 where I felt like the things I was trying so hard to do were not good enough. And by this point, I'm 9 years sober. I'm 9 years connected to my higher power. And I felt like, man, I am still not good enough. And it was the final thing I thought was, I'm a destroyer. Everything that I touch breaks. Even when I want to do good, it doesn't matter because it's just going to break anyway because I'm a destroyer. And it was so difficult to battle that thought. To be convinced that no matter how much progress you've made, it's really not good enough because deep down, you're just cursed. And I thank God that I've learned in that pivotal time that my level of victory is dependent on my level of transparency. And I ended up finding a healthy mentor that I could talk to. I got to finally realize, wait a minute, I don't have to put up with a toxic church. I don't have to go to a place where I'm hated. Oh my gosh, I didn't know that. And I found someone that I could really talk to where I could share something vulnerable and not receive judgment back. And I found that when I am, that God doesn't call me to be someone else, that He's called me to be in my own skin. and that I can be my genuine self, and that is actually what he wants. He's not calling me to be some robot, some copycat, but he wants me to be me. And I realized that all of these things, all of these lies that I was believing, that I don't deserve anything, that I'm unwanted, that I have nobody, that I am broken, and that I'm a destroyer, that these were all things that were painted on me by others. These were all imageries and sayings that was painted on me by my experiences and by other people. And it really took this moment of connecting with my higher power and finding out who God was to me. For me, it was seen so clearly in Jesus. And when I came back to him, instead of what others say, I got to find out these truths. And it was through transparency and through this being able to be transparent and just real instead of just trying to pretend, that I was able to find out what those truths are. Now I'm in this place where I found out that I'm allowed to have desires, that God is not, that I have not been so bad that God doesn't want me to have anything good. I've learned that I'm loved by God, I'm loved by my family, and I'm loved by my community. And if I'm ever in a community that doesn't love me, it's not because I'm unlovable, but because they can't see the love that I deserve. I should go somewhere else. And I've learned that I belong to a community just as I am, that I shouldn't have to pretend to be someone else, that God has called me to be my unique self, and that's a good thing, that I am valuable and validated despite anything that I've done in the past, that I am still allowed to be a person. And then I've learned that I'm able to be whole and valuable despite having struggles, that even when I struggle with temptation now, it doesn't discredit who I am as a person. It doesn't discredit my value. That at the end of the day, nobody's perfect. At the end of the day, even if I were to fall tomorrow, I would have still made 13 years of progress. That doesn't erase the progress that I've made. I haven't been, it's not as much of a tightrope to where if you make one mistake and you fall off, you have to go all the way back to the beginning. But that it's this journey that we're just taking one step at a time. And the last thing that I learned is that God allows me to be a builder, not a destroyer, but a builder who's able to help others as long as I'm willing to show the same kind of love that I've received and allow myself to be genuine and transparent just like God has called me to. And so, again, that's my story today. I hope that was helpful for you. And I'm so grateful for Roy inviting me here today. But that being said, thank you guys so much.
Well, there's my story. I hope that was meaningful for you. But let's think about some takeaways from that talk. One, notice how throughout that talk, I was trying to build rapport by connecting with my audience through personal stories. But also, number two, look at how I continue to speak in the kind of dialect that is often used in recovery. Like Paul says in Corinthians that he becomes all things to all people, that when he's with the Jews, he behaves as the Jews. When he's with the Gentiles, he behaves like a Gentile. And so even though I don't necessarily use the verbiage like higher power, I knew that people in recovery use that terminology. And I consistently made reference to my higher power seen in Jesus. And see, when you talk in that kind of the kind of verbiage that people better understand, you help better connect, and you also help break down those barriers. We should strive to try to talk in a way that people would understand better. And the third thing that I want you to notice from this talk is that I stayed on time. They told me I had 35 minutes and I finished in 32 minutes. And it's so important for us, especially when we get asked to speak somewhere, to respect people's time. It really helps you to not only build rapport with organizations' event planners, but it helps you to not make the audience feel overly drained. It is so much more effective when you use the right time that was allotted to you. With all that being said, I hope that this episode made a difference in your life and that it was edifying for your leadership. Can you do me a favor? Can you leave a rating and review for this podcast? It would really help me out and it would help this show to appear in other people's feed. Until next time, have a great life.